Yes, I know who you are, but who doesn't?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Monday Movies, where I am always joined by my good mate Tom Gibbs, TGMA Productions, better called Gibbsy. Gibbsy, you doing all right, mate?
Yeah, I'm not doing too bad. I'm feeling refreshed. Now I've got a cup of water by my side. Life is pretty good.
Absolutely. I've got my water too, and today we are discussing in what has become quite a controversial film, in all due respects, El Camino, a Breaking Bad story, which is obviously the continuation of the show Breaking Bad by Vince Gilligan, and it focuses on Jesse Pinkman. I was just about to say Jesse Ventura from Predator and Running Man, so I'm glad I didn't say that. Captain Freedom's workout. But yeah, it's an interesting story, Gibbsy, isn't it? In that El Camino is not necessarily a film we needed, but we got anyway. Do you enjoy it?
Yes, I was when the news first came about that a Breaking Bad movie was going to be put into production and released. I thought, oh God, the story ends quite nicely. Why continue it on, as it were? But then I slowly realised that it's about what happens to Jesse Pinkman shortly after the final scene from Breaking Bad. I think that it really is a film that if you haven't seen Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, I would watch those beforehand because I feel it's a better experience having been aware of the full story.
I agree with you. It's like going into a movie having not seen the first 30 minutes, isn't it? You miss out all of the backstory and the setup, only for you to realise that nothing makes sense, which is never a good thing.
Yeah, if you go into watching El Camino as a new film, not aware of anything else in the Breaking Bad universe, it can be quite confusing. You almost don't know who any of the characters are when Badger and Skinny Pete, for example, are reintroduced. You may not have a clue who they are. Even go for Joe or the owner of the vacuum cleaner shop, for example. You just may not be aware of who any of these people are if you haven't seen the show.
That's a really good point because it is an inside movie. I don't know the actual terminology for it, but it is an inside movie in that if you do not know what Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul is, then you really will not fully grasp the story. And I think that's maybe one of its biggest problems is that take it out of context and it's kind of an okay movie about a guy outrunning the cops and trying to find money and being reminded of his past and ultimately trying to find some sort of closure, isn't it? To
Yeah,
me, sorry to interrupt you, to me it is like 4 episodes of Breaking Bad confined into one. And I think that's where the pacing issues come about because I really like seeing Jesse Pinkman's kind of standalone story, but it just feels paced awkwardly. It feels like it was made for TV,
yeah, it's got that classic pacing of the episodes. You and I have both seen the show Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul up to this point.
which are both
Um,
great.
Indeed, both great TV shows, but it carries that same pacing level that was introduced in both those two shows, and it does. I can understand definitely where you're coming from in that it feels like multiple episodes of the same TV show can join together.
Yeah, rightly so. And the necessity is a massive question during this movie because many people who I know personally, we've talked about the movie and most of us have said, including us now, that we like the movie. It's certainly a very well made movie. The cinematography is astonishing, really beautifully done. But it's just a question of whether we needed it. Because spoilers for Breaking Bad ends on a very good note, and not in a way that for me ever screamed the need for closure. Because I don't think closure was the point, was it? Spoilers for Breaking Bad, Jesse obviously drives off kind of into the sunset style of a new life basically he's on the verge of a new life, isn't he? And Walter White is definitely dead, which I think they confirm in this movie, don't they?
I believe so. Yes.
They definitely confirm it. So you just wonder, is the story here really essential?
I think that it was. I think the movie itself is targeted towards those that wondered what would have happened to Jesse Pinkman. It would have been nice to have made up your own assumption on what he does with his life, but El Camino presents that he's learnt lessons from his from mentors in the past. For example, like with Mike Ehrmantraut in the beginning, where he talks about trying to put things right potentially, and that can't necessarily be done, but in a way he kind of needs to move on, and you get a real sense for how mature Jesse Pinkman as a character has become from having seen him be a lot more immature in earlier seasons of Breaking Bad, for example.
It's a good performance by Aaron Paul, actually. that's what I think is the best thing about the movie, because, as you said, you really see a sense of change in him, especially from how different he was at the beginning of the show. And I do really enjoy the fact that he goes on a very similar journey that Walter White has to go through, when Walter White obviously goes into hiding with meeting the man at the Hoover shop, played by Robert Forster, rest in peace, who I believe this was his last screen appearance, so God bless him. I think he's a great actor. Really sad to see him go. But at the same time, while it's great to see him on that journey, quite similar to Walter White, it's just a question of, was it absolutely essential? That's sorry to go back to it again, but it's that one question that's always at the back of my mind.
Yeah, it's easy to see how this movie wasn't a mandatory part of the story that needed to be told. It provides a nice closure for Jesse Pinkman's character arc. When we get to right at the end of the movie, for example, when he's starting his new life in Alaska, when he's driving off with his new car at the time with his new identity, and that's a nice closure for him to know that he's got an okay ending to this terrible situation that occurred right at the beginning of the film and at the end of Breaking Bad.
Because there are those people who argue that maybe Jesse Pinkman was second to Walter White in Breaking Bad. And in some sense, I can agree with that argument. El Camino is truly a Jesse Pinkman story, isn't it? And I think what makes the film really interesting is that, kind of like, this is going to be a really bizarre reference, but The Dark Knight Returns, the Frank Miller comic book based on Batman, in that Batman is bringing an end to this chapter of his life, and same with Jesse Pinkman. It's a closing of the book on this chapter, isn't it? And I really like all of these scenes where he is interacting with Jane or Hank. Not Hank, sorry, I got completely confused. Mike Ehrmantraut. But the one that really does let it down is the Walter White cameo. It just, you can tell Bryan Cranston is wearing a bold cap and it's not quite the right head shape, and it just doesn't feel right. It feels as if there's one person that you shouldn't have brought back, it's Bryan Cranston.
Yeah, the first time I watched it through, I almost thought that it was not a flashback at all in a way. And it didn't occur to me at that time until I saw Walter White appear in the shot for the first time, thinking, wait a minute.
Yeah.
But then you start to see the RV outside, for example, and you see Jesse Pinkman going, yeah, bitch, at the counter and things like that. You think, okay, this is a flashback. But ultimately, I don't think it was. I think out of all of the flashback scenes that appeared in the film, because there are a couple, I think that one was the least necessary, and it felt like it was the one that was mostly for the fans that wanted to see a return of Walter White.
Absolutely true. It feels like fan service, because I would argue that him talking to Mike or Jane is all about the people that impacted him positively. Whereas Walter White was certainly not a positive impact on his life in no way, shape or form, aside from being a decent chemistry teacher. So it just feels as if it doesn't quite fit in the message of it. Because I completely forgot, there's also these very elongated and truncated flashbacks with Todd. Now, I'm all for Todd. I think he's an inherently creepy character, very bizarre. But I think they haven't done themselves a service in making this movie so many years after Breaking Bad, because everyone has aged significantly, and none more than Todd. I think Jesse Plemons is a brilliant actor. I love him in Fargo and many movies, but I think he's put on weight or something, because he just doesn't look the same, does he?
No, he had, at the time of filming El Camino, he had put on weight, you could say, quite a bit more than from what his appearance was in Breaking Bad. But at the same time, I do respect that they had Jesse Plemons come in and reprise his role as Todd. I don't feel that dynamic would have been there if it was a different actor that had been used to play Todd in those scenes.
The most interesting scene regarding that relationship for me is when Jesse knows there's an option when they're out in the desert burying the body. He knows there's an option for him to shoot Todd and flee, but there's something in him that says no. And I think he's bribed with pizza and beer, isn't he?
Yeah.
And it's that kind of inherently sinister and malevolent quality to Todd, where he just knows how to be really cool and kind of nice. There's something about him where there's a seedy underbelly to him, but he's also quite caring. He's a complex character in this, isn't he?
He is. I sat through the film thinking, what an absolute nutter. He probably is out of his mind in some places, because there are a couple of nice, I'd say nice, there are lots of little subtle nods to Breaking Bad the series, such as you've got little details like the tarantula in the in the box that Todd keeps at his house. That's a nod to the train heist.
Oh, the spider.
Things like that. Yeah, the trencher he keeps just in his house.
Really nice detail. Because if you watch the movie, I think it's The Road to El Camino. Did you see that one?
I've seen that. That's like a behind the scenes thing. It's not very long, but
It could have been longer.
Yeah, I think it should have been in a way because it's only about 13 minutes or so. Not very long.
Yeah, it could have been longer because they really went into the production design of Todd's room with all of his weird kind of orbs with, kind of axiomatically wrong things and oxymoronic things that just don't fit together. It's really interesting production design, and I would have liked to see more of that. Because one of my favourite shots in the movie is the bird's eye view of Todd's apartment, where Jesse's going around rummaging the place for the money.
Oh, yes.
That's where I think the film really shines. On a technical level, it is absolutely superb. It's amazingly shot, and I think Vince Gilligan did direct this, didn't he?
Yeah, he both writ it and directed it, yeah.
He proves himself a very capable director here, and this is feature-length stuff we're talking about here. It might not have had a theatrical release, but it's still a feature film, and not once did I think, this is made for TV, aside from the pacing.
The main thing that I was most interested to see how it developed within El Camino was that throughout Breaking Bad, Jesse had been kind of viewed as this pet of a character in a way by both Walter White and Todd Alquist throughout the series, and that's reinforced quite a lot throughout El Camino. You've got that sort of owner and dog type view of Todd and Jesse. When Jesse's kept in a cage, he's given things like pizza and beer, treats as it were. But you've also got that view of him in that scene where Jesse is rummaging around the house from a bird's eye view. It's mentioned in the Road to El Camino documentary that in that scene it's almost depicted as like a little mouse rummaging around a cage, looking for something. I think that's another thing that really reinforces this pet type view of Jesse.
That's a really good point. Yeah, look at you bloody film student, reading into every detail of the film.
Well, what can I say? I'm a big fan of the Breaking Bad universe.
Rightly so, me too. And one thing that does come through is Dave Porter returns as the composer. Where the film also excels is that it does fit that Breaking Bad universe perfectly. It feels like you haven't spent any time away from it. It just so happens that this is a movie instead of a TV episode. And the music is fantastic. There's that kind of beautiful instrumental texture to the music, isn't there? With just the right amount of synth, am I right? There's some synth to the score.
There is. None of the score is overly dramatic or magnificent in any way, but there's enough detail for you to think, okay, this has been created to amplify this setting or this mood, and it does that so well within El Camino.
And also, as Jesse goes along on his journey, he obviously stumbles upon Todd's flat, doesn't he, from a flashback, and it results in someone else taking most of the money, and there's this kind of like Western gunslinger type ending to it, isn't there, where Jesse finally takes control of the whole situation. What do you think of him basically becoming a killer?
That scene as a whole, I think, is where you see the most change in Jesse throughout the entire movie, because not only do you see him sort of overcome his trauma from spoiler for Breaking Bad, but from when he kills Gale about midway through the series, and you see him responding, and he doesn't like the fact that he's just killed someone as part of a job, but you see him overcome that throughout that scene because he ends up killing the entire gang. Not only that, but then using chemistry that he'd picked up from Walter White, I'm assuming, at that point, to cause the entire... Is it a mechanic shop that they're in?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, but causing the entire place to explode in a massive Michael Bay type...
What an analogy.
But yes, that scene was where I'd witnessed the most change, I think.
And this is where you and I are probably going to disagree then, because after you mentioned him killing Gale, there's an inherently present moral compass to him, isn't there? Kind of like Batman, as we referenced earlier, where Batman's one code is to not kill, only when he absolutely has to. And that's where I feel like they kind of missed the point, because for me, Jesse is clearly a character who still has that moral compass where he doesn't want to kill. So for him to suddenly massacre an entire room full of people and blow it on fire, just feels a little bit out of character. It just feels a bit strange.
I can understand that. I can see how that would feel like a bit of a sudden change. But it's nice to see that he's overcome. If that is the case, then he has overcome this moral problem in such a way so that he can therefore take the remaining 2/3 of Todd's money to then eventually move on with his own life.
Because the whole point is that he doesn't actually have enough, does he? When he goes to the Hoover store.
He gets to the Hoover shop, he realizes he's about a few grand short, then goes back to claim the other 2/3. And that's I want to discuss the plot for the movie. Doesn't really feel I've mentioned it with a couple of films previously on Monday Movies, but it doesn't really feel like it's been set up to go a certain direction.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
So you've got Jesse initially running away from the scene that happens at the end of Breaking Bad. He then goes to Skinny and Badger's house where they trade pink slips and they trade their one last goodbye before they go. And from there, I almost couldn't really predict where things were going to go with Jesse. I didn't really know what score still needed to be settled.
That's an interesting point, because in some sense I would agree with you that there are elements of the story that go in directions you wouldn't expect. But at the same time, I feel like it was a very safe conclusion in that he has to go through the Hoover guy to get a new identity and go somewhere different. He has to obviously have these flashbacks of people who impacted his life and all of that. It feels like a very calculated and safe way of ending the story. And in some sense, I would have liked a bit more risk taking. It would have been nice, it would have been interesting if Jesse went on a journey that required him to be completely gone from Albuquerque. Maybe he doesn't even spend a single second in there after he's escaped from the factory at the end of Breaking Bad. Because it does, for what we got, I think it's one of those movies that I'm grateful we got it. I just think it needed a bit more work. Because at the end of the day, this could have been even better as like a 4-part TV series addendum to Breaking Bad.
So with El Camino, yes, I very much enjoyed the movie. As has been mentioned, a couple of things I think could have been different about the movie. But ultimately, I think to get the most enjoyment out of El Camino, you would need to watch the series Breaking Bad and potentially Better Call Saul first to get your full experience out of the movie.
Completely agree with you, Gibbsy. If you haven't seen those shows, it is like dipping your feet into cold water without knowing the temperature. It really is just the wrong thing to do. So in a way, though, that's why the film fails, because it is inherently reliant on the show for you to know what's going on. But at the same time, as a fan of Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, I'm happy we have this movie. I still question the necessity of it, but for what it is, no matter how safe, no matter how calculated it is a movie with something to say. And it is very nice to see Jesse Pinkman get the end of a story. Guys, that is another episode of Monday Movies on El Camino. Let us know what you think of the movie in the comments section below. Gibbsy, where can we find you, mate?
So these days, my YouTube channel is where I'm most active, TGMA Productions. I upload episodes of Monday Movies each week on that forum. I do music-related things, whether it's my own compositions and my work, or whether it's work from other places, just general media that people may want to listen to. I'll include a link to Stan's channel and Stan's Twitter down in the description, as well as the new Monday Movies Twitter that's also been recently created.
Absolutely. Guys, you can also find me on Twitter at Stand Wilks 10, and on YouTube I obviously have the previous episodes of Monday Movies, some music of mine, and some short films, so please check them out if you've got the time. Guys, thank you for your time, and we shall see you in the next episode.
Indeed. See you next week, everybody.